Matt. So while everyone gets on the panel here, I just want to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Taylor Barnett. I'm the Senior Community Engineer at Transposit. I'll be moderating today. I'm going to let the panelists go ahead and introduce each of themselves. You want to start, Kat?
Hello, everybody. My name is Kat Cosgrove, and I am a developer advocate at JFrog, but you probably know me from Twitter drama.
Hello, everyone. I'm Katy Farmer, Technical Community Manager at Circle CI, and you probably know me from maybe nowhere, but sometimes I like to be nice on Twitter. People know that about me.
You are very nice on Twitter.
And you draw amazing
Oh,
things.
thank you.
And Arathi, do you want to
Yeah,
introduce yourself?
sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Arathi. I am a director of engineering at Smartsheet. I'm not on Twitter, so you probably don't know me from there, but it sounds like everyone else is really great on Twitter. So that's awesome.
Not something we've always wanted to be, but it chose us. So this conversation is about stressing our systems in the new world. I think just to kind of level set the conversation, I want to ask everyone, what does stressing our systems mean to you? Whoever wants to jump in first there.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start by saying that we're talking about many different types of systems, right? So this stressing the systems for Circle CI means maybe like we have problems with crypto miners just using Circle CI like bananas, and we have to figure that out. But like that doesn't.
Crypto miners love CI.
You know what? It's like it's a thing. They just can't get enough of us. So I guess I should thank them for their service. But I don't know. I guess regardless of the system, for me, it just means that like I am operating at or above my capacity, right? Like it's approaching like I have no free space to do anything else but think about the main stress in my system.
Yeah, and it means like testing to find out where that limit is, like what is capacity, because you don't really like know for sure until you go and try it. So you put a bunch of load on a system, whether that's a technical system or a people system, and find out where the line is, and then don't cross the line or do something to add more capacity, whether that means resources or people. And also to find out what breaks, because you're also not going to know what breaks under load until you put it under load.
You're like, oh no, it's me.
It has all been us at this point in the pandemic at some point.
Yeah, I think to me, testing any system is, like you said, Kat, pushing its limits, right? Stressing a system, I mean, is when you push its limits, and sometimes you don't know what the limits are, and the stress helps you find out. But there are healthy and unhealthy aspects to that, right? And I think it also, ideally there is then a window to recover. Like I think stress and recovery are important, and what we haven't, what happens through things like, there are healthy ways to stress a system where you kind of push the limits, find out what they are, and then you allow for recovery. And with the pandemic, I think what we've seen is, when you don't allow the recovery, that's when the stress becomes
a serious problem.
Yes.
What related to that, what are new ways that you feel that we've been, pushing our systems, software, ourselves in, the last, year and a half now, that maybe we hadn't seen before?
Ooh, I have a very specific opinion on this that is relevant to probably a few people that are watching this, and definitely some DevOpsDays staff and or volunteers.
We're listening.
Being a developer advocate has been extremely weird over the last year, and it did introduce an unexpected stress. And that unexpected stress is that previously we could only like go give a couple talks a month, right? Because we had to travel, we had to like get on a plane and get there. And the results of the pandemic has been that all of these events, including this one, went virtual. So all of a sudden, I could speak all over the world. And the result is that sometimes I was giving 5 or 6 talks a week. And that was an incredible quantity of stress. And I did not expect that. I didn't expect it to be as much effort as it was. I think I gave something like 60 talks last year, which is outrageous and would have been absolutely unheard of before the pandemic. So that was an entirely new stress and an entirely new like thing that had to be accounted for. So if you are still doing that, please stop doing that. It's not good.
I think also just put in there related to that is like people realizing that they could have a video call about certain things that maybe should have been an email.
Yes.
or a JIRA ticket or something like, I think a lot of people noticed the number of hours that we were spending in meetings, not just like on screen. For some people that maybe if you weren't working remote before, any on screen definitely increased, but I think
Almost. Oh, sorry, Taylor.
Oh no, like I think it's just like something happened where more meetings started. Like and it's going to be interesting how we kind of like come back to that, especially when some teams will be more hybrid, in office versus remote, or like just that's going to be interesting. Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, everyone I've talked to, as soon as lockdown started, everyone said, I'm working way more. And then that just like, we went through these weird phases where I feel like everyone said they felt like they were working more. And I think like when you're at home, especially if you're not used to working remotely, you feel like you have to show your work more and like prove that you're working instead of just like chilling in your very cool house, I assume. But like everyone felt this pressure to just keep working because people were afraid of losing their jobs in the pandemic, or whether they just were like, I need to prove that I'm working because I'm not in the office, or whether because I'm not traveling anymore. And everyone was working just like so many hours. I know I was. And I think something that's interesting to me that's like, so I feel like in the beginning of the pandemic, employers were very much like, everyone, like every manager was struggling. So everything was like very forgiving, but we've reached a point now where it's sort of like a new normal and like the expectations have been reset to this like wild high standard. But we're all severely degraded from the outage. So it's like, we haven't like figured out that balance yet. And Arathi, I'm curious because I know you're a manager, like that couldn't have been easy to suddenly be like, oh, I'm a people manager and now I manage people in this like wild pandemic situation. That couldn't have been a skill that was already in your belt, right?
No, it definitely wasn't, and my team, it's interesting. Smartsheet had very much a work from work culture, and my team had a little more, I think we had relatively more individuals that kind of worked from home and were maybe a little bit, more into the remote work thing. But in the beginning, it just felt like such a huge, there was just, it was just a huge, just struggle, right? Trying to figure out how do you organize things. Everybody was also, understandably very afraid, right? There was a fair amount of fear and just stress about health, about, just, there was so much we did not know. And as you said, I hadn't, so kind of definitely, managing people working remotely is one thing, but then under these kinds of conditions, it becomes a whole other thing where you're also just trying to figure out how to transform, your workplace, your working style, how the company does things at a larger scale. And people are dealing with a lot of personal stress, health stress. And so, yeah, it was not something, and as you said, Katie, right? I think, what I defaulted and was something that I did in the big, and I've tried to do, through this whole process is kind of to, I don't even want to use the word forgiving, but be understanding, right? And be aware that, people are not, including myself, right, are often not functioning at there are actually days when people are functioning very well, but everyone is going to have good days and bad days, and that we need to be aware of that and kind of make room for that in people's lives, right? And for me now, it's, you know, at least for me personally, it's even gotten to, you know, with kind of Zoom fatigue and all of these things, there are sort of, you know, good hours and bad hours, right? Like, and so one thing I try to always be aware of as a manager is like, look, if this can happen to me, it can happen to my, it's going to, it absolutely happens to, you know, to my reports, to people working for me, right? To people in my organization, right? Like if there's a moment when I'm just like, oh, and there's all these kind of this, you know, I remember at the beginning there were all these articles on how to effectively work from home, and there were all kind of, you know, there were these tips like, okay, have your video on so that you can be really engaged in meetings, and, you know, put your camera like 4 or 5 inches above, you know, like put it on a stack of books or something, and so you're looking kind of up at it, and, you know, all of these tips, and you know, now with having done this for so long, this fatigue sort of sets in, where you're just like, well, I don't want to turn my video on. Or, you know, I was at a panel the other day and people were talking about ways to be present, and you know, someone mentioned, you know, don't have a virtual background, and I was sort of like, you know, I don't want us, obviously those things do have impact on engagement, but also for any given person, I don't want them to feel pressure to, oh, I have to turn my camera on, I can't have a virtual background, I can't be off even for a second, right? And so I try to be very mindful of that, right, with people, where it's like, yeah, you don't want to turn your camera on, that's just fine. You know, you need to take a day, that's just, yeah, that's just fine.
Definitely. Related to that, you know, for everyone working from home, there's kind of like, it's become like everyone is in an on-call mentality, because you're at the office in a way all the time now. And, you know, I think a lot of people have like struggled with how to deal with that. Have y'all had anything that y'all found that was like, oh, this really helped me with dealing with that?
So I've been working remote for years. The concept of having a work area in my home is not new to me, and I can confidently say that this is not working from home. What we are doing here is not normal work from home. I'm very used to it. I am not used to this, and it's been more than a year of this, and part of that is because everybody is doing it. People with maybe some boundary issues are considerably more comfortable pinging you for stuff outside of normal work hours. And because of the aforementioned stress of, you know, the pandemic, people feel a little bit more pressure to respond to these out of office hours requests when they super shouldn't be. You got to turn off notifications on Slack and enforce that. Ignore it. Ignore it. Ignore it. Because if you don't have like a big enough living area to have like a dedicated work from home space, I don't. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment with my husband and 2 cats. So the desk I am currently working from is the same desk with like my gaming PC on it. And after this panel is done, I'm going to go play video games. It's going to become a home space. So not everybody has like a separate office. So you have to enforce that boundary digitally. And it's going to feel really weird and a little bit rude at first if you're not used to it. But like, turn off your Slack notifications and do not respond to them. People can wait. People can wait. If it is an actual emergency and you're the relevant person to fix that, then you're probably on an on-call rota and they can page you, because that's your job at that point. But it does feel like being on call for a ton of people who are not used to being on call. They've never been on call before. They don't know how to handle it, but we've all been on call for a year and a half. And that is brutal. And it's a lot of stress for any system. And it really sucks that in this case, it was the human system that has started to fail. But it is something we all need.
The computers are fine.
The computers are fine. The computers are great. The computers have handled this really well. The human systems haven't. And we need to acknowledge that a lot of it is the result of us not working from home. We are living at work. And if you don't start enforcing digital boundaries, the system is going to collapse. Your system is going to collapse.
Well, I think that's interesting, right? Because if you think about it, like when you're on call, you sort of know
Yeah.
like what is expected of you, right? And I think it's like on call, but it's like being on call for the first time with no one to ask for help.
Oh yeah, you have no babysitter, you have no mentor, you don't have like
You're supposed normally, you would be trained to be on call.
Yeah.
Right.
Like or have some kind of run book to help you walk through things. With this,
anything.
the run book doesn't really exist.
No,
You're
and like,
making it up on the fly.
it doesn't exist for any of us, There's literally nobody on planet Earth that we can call and ask how to handle this situation because this hasn't happened before. And it's happening to all of us at the same time. It's like a weird collective system trauma and nobody knows what they're doing.
Yeah, and no one in like, especially in the first, I don't know, I will say most of it, because like now we're starting to see some like vaccines in the US and there's like a little bit of travel here and there, but not much, but like no one would take time off.
Oh
No
yeah.
one would take time off because they thought, well, I'm not going anywhere. And I'm like, right, but that doesn't mean you don't need to be here, like I think all the managers should have a closing time policy, which is you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Like take time off.
Yeah, like when something is wrong with like, oh, my camera overheated, that's fun.
We're stressing things.
We're stressing things. When like a digital system starts to like fall over, you've got a dashboard with like warning lights on it that scream at you when something is wrong. Like, when a system is degraded or when it has fallen over completely. But we have a whole bunch of people who have never experienced burnout before, and they don't know what the symptoms look like. And they don't realize it until they burn out explosively. And then it is a huge, huge problem to deal with. I realized it was happening to me last October, and my manager was like, hey, take some time off. You have no choice but to take some time off. And I did it again 3 weeks ago.
Related to that, are y'all starting to see on y'all's teams people scheduling out larger vacations and stuff in the fall, late summer, winter? Because I've been reading this thing that that companies are not prepared for the basically ambush of people wanting to take PTO soon. And are we going to have enough coverage for projects, or like what are expectations of what work will be done in the fall and Q3, Q4? Are y'all, I know Arathi, you do some stuff with like resource, like making sure things are you seeing that any?
It's interesting. I have definitely, I've tried to tell people on my team, and I think, Smartsheet has been very good about this, and hopefully, other people have as well, to encourage people to take time off. Like every time I have a one-on-one, I ask the person, are you planning to take some time off? And I've been doing that for like a year now, because but as other people have pointed out, if there's, no vacation to take, then people don't necessarily want to take time off and sit at home. I do try to encourage it because it can be, still kind of a break to get out of the work headspace and the kind of just being on call continuously. Are we seeing a ton of people planning PTO? Not just yet, but I would not be surprised. Like, as in, we're preparing for it, right? And I would say, internally as a team, we're definitely preparing for it and understanding it. And I don't know that we've quite worked out, like, okay, are we going to move roadmaps? How are we going to handle that? But we're having those conversations, and I do expect that it's likely to happen, right? Like in the sort of the last quarter of the year.
Yeah. I mean, I know personally, as soon as I got my second shot, I was like, okay, what's my first vacation? Like that was already, I haven't scheduled it yet, but I'm getting really close to starting to.
Oh, do it. I did. I went home.
I personally love staycations. I loved them before the pandemic. So I took time off, maybe not as much as I should have. But I might also just be weird that I just really love doing nothing or nothing at home. It's a passion of mine.
Well, Pokemon Snap
Sometimes
did just come out.
vacations almost feel too stressful sometimes because I put like a lot of expectations that I want out of them, of relaxation and stuff.
Sure.
Related to, a lot of teams started seeing that like deploys, or the rate of deploys, were happening more during the last year or so. Maybe that because, different impacts to their services that they were, developing and operating, or just other factors. What are some of the things that historically maybe we've been forgetting, that we're now seeing to have to deal with this increase of deploys? I feel like Arathi, you might have had something on that.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, for my team, like the rate of deploys has gone up so much, and partly it's because the team size actually doubled over the past year. We were hiring, and then we got additional resourcing, and we hired some more, and so there was also this whole sort of remote onboarding thing that we had to. So in addition to being a remote manager, like remote onboarding, not a thing that we had really done, and we had to kind of figure that out. And so now, and then sort of remote, ramping up how and as we started to sort of hit a stride there, I think my team is, our teams at all, my teams have always had a setup where we could deploy, sort of multiple times a week. We were pretty agile about that. But now with the team size increasing, like we're literally seeing, multiple deploys a day, several times. And sometimes people actually aren't able to deploy because sort of all the deploy spots for the day are taken. We don't like to, deploy too close to the end of the day, and, various things like that. And so we're definitely seeing that. And, what are we seeing things that we missed before? I would say, yes. One of the things something that is that we're seeing that we continue to enhance sort of is this ability to quickly recognize when something went wrong, right? Like, and we're kind of routinely, we with the result of more frequent deploys, there are a few things, right? One is, if you're deploying once a day, something goes wrong, you can very quickly attribute it to the deployment that went out. And then we, because of the way our infrastructure is set up, it would be relatively easy to roll back because we always have sort of, the previous container image. And so we had that system sort of down pat. And now, okay, you're doing multiple deploys, you have deploying a lot more often, and then you might discover that something went wrong the next day, but you can't, even if you can isolate it to a change, you don't always have the ability to just roll back, right? And so you kind of learn to roll forward a lot. So that's one of the things that we have gotten a bit better at, is saying, okay, how do we roll forward? How do we manage expectations? Another one is just around things like logging, telemetry, load testing, that sort of thing, like really paying attention to what's going on during every deployment. And I don't want to say that before we would just kind of deploy and forget about it. That's not what we did at all. But I think we've tried to add more error logging, more telemetry for every change that we make, and also the ability to turn things off. So something that we started doing was putting what we call, what you could call flags or modules. So the ability to turn something off for things that were a lot, like normally we would do that for, if you have a big new feature, but we're increasingly saying, even if what you're doing is relatively small, have the ability to turn it off so that if there's any doubt, you can just quickly turn it off, right? So sort of figuring out all these levers to say, okay, how can you keep an eye on what's going on, and how can you kind of quickly do some damage control so that you can then go back and dig into what the real problem might be.
Yeah. Related to, technical dependencies and stuff, like how do we deal with the fact that there's more dependencies, hidden or not, in our like actual technical systems too, that we're starting to see more of? I know, Katy, you had some thoughts on that.
I have more thoughts than reason, I think, but I just think about it a lot. Like even when I was like first beginning to code, I remember like I first learned Ruby, and you can write Ruby, you know, like if you're doing, you know, hello world things, you don't need a lot of help. You don't need to import much. You don't need to use a lot of libraries. And then my next language was JavaScript, and it was like, whoa. Like you can do, you know, hello worlds in JavaScript and stuff, but people tend not to. Like it's a language that kind of leans heavily into dependencies, right? I love JavaScript, so don't at me with your JavaScript opinions. Big fan. It's like the Wild West. What are the rules? I don't know. Who's in charge? But I love it. And I think about this like at Circle, we have kind of at the moment, and we're intertwined a bit with GitHub. So sometimes we'll have a GitHub outage and people will say like, hey, Circle is down. And I'll be like, actually, we're doing great, honey, but GitHub is having an issue. But to the user, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter that it's GitHub and not us. Like it matters that our service is not available. So I think it's really worth thinking about what you take on with a dependency, right? Like you take some responsibility. And so being really thoughtful, like, you know, one, it's GitHub. Sometimes it's down, but usually it recovers quickly. They have a great team. Like, we're going to be okay. Like, we've put a lot of thought into that. And that's sort of what I would recommend for everyone. Is like, if you're going to stress your system, make sure that you understand like the input, right? And all of our dependencies are input that are just, you know, little chaos gremlins that we need to be prepared for. So I think that like, one, you have to test your systems, and two, you need to be as knowledgeable as you can about the things that are coming in. Like choose your dependencies as carefully and thoughtfully as you can so that you know, like, and have it, you know, have your system measured in a way that you know where those failures are coming from. Because, you know, like from inside of Circle, it's very helpful for me to be like, oh, it's not Circle services that are down, it's this GitHub one, and we know it's not us. Like the idea of like even having that telemetry in place to know, like for a lot of companies and people I've talked to, like still isn't in place. So making sure that like, not only do you be careful with your dependencies, but that like you are able to identify like the sources of stress also.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just like being able to see that service status super easily. You know, certain errors can look like they're coming from an internal service when it's actually something with the external service that has the dependency.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a very quick anecdote, which is that like I have an anxiety disorder. So during this panini, people have been coming to me and saying like, well, this is how you feel all the time, right? Like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I panic. But also, so sometimes if I was like about to have an anxiety attack, I would get physical symptoms, right? Sometimes before I even knew I was anxious, I would get really overheated, start to sweat. I would have like dry mouth, like all these things. And I would just be like, oh, I don't feel good. I think I'm, you know, a little bit of a hypochondriac in that anxiety mode where I'm just like, okay, well, I guess it's menopause or whatever. Like, you know, I would just jump to whatever I thought was the cause. And eventually I realized that I was like, they were precursors to an event. And then sometimes later on, sometimes if I just got too hot, that would cause anxiety. They had like become connected. So I think it's really important to understand that like these factors, like they might seem, you know, these like outside factors can still become deeply embedded in the issue. Like, yeah, there are signs and you need to be paying attention and noticing and like, you know, documenting as much of it as you can so that you can say like, oh, you know what, actually I'm getting too hot and it's because my anxiety is rising. Or it's like, oh, hey, our systems, like our service is slowing down a little bit. And in the past, that means we're about to hit a cliff. Like just really paying attention to all of those like external factors, I think is important.
You know, oh, go ahead.
I was just complimenting Katy.
Oh, I spoke over
She's a
it.
treasure.
I'm horrible.
Oh, it's okay.
you know, and so that's external dependencies. Like internal dependencies are, you know, an interesting challenge, especially, you know, in this world of microservices now. Any thoughts on that?
Very stressful.
Microservices stress me out. I
sometimes find, and I would be interested in what you all think about this, that sometimes the microservices are less, like, they're not as well traced, documented, what have you, as external ones.
Yeah, that is definitely a whole thing. There are entire, you know, tools for that now to make it like less painful to look at microservices and see what's going on inside of them and recognize when something is going wrong and find out why something is going wrong. But some of them are a pain to implement.
Yeah, I mean, we're very early in the developer and operator experience of many of those tools. I know, Arathi, we've talked about a little bit about this concept of contract testing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there are kind of two things, right? One is for internal dependencies or areas where you know your contract. I think it's super important to have really good test coverage on the contract, right? Like really, you know, you write the test coverage for the contract before you know, like TDD or something, right? Like you write your test for the contract and then you go and actually like connect the two services. And so that I think is super important, right? The other thing that's important, I think, with dependencies is to have sort of wide, shallow testing, right? So you don't need to know too much about why, especially for external dependencies, why is it failing? Like, you know, in the case of the GitHub example, right? Like you can, okay, can you ping GitHub or something? Like it doesn't have to be about like, okay, hitting a specific server or going deep, right? Something that happened, you know, we've had recently at Smartsheet, a few months ago, we had an experience where we actually had a health check that was going so deep that it took the system down because the health check was timing out, and then another one was getting queued up, and another one was getting queued up, and it was kind of this idea of like a health check that was going very deep. It didn't really have to go that deep, right? Like the actual, like there was a much shallower test where you could have said, okay, just ping this top level thing. If it doesn't respond, then then you return that it's not working, as opposed to this thing pings the next thing, pings the next thing, and then you have some server that is basically holding open some queue of outstanding health checks, right? And so it was kind of this interesting situation where the health checks actually caused us, you know, something that you would think is critical to your observability, actually caused us to experience a degradation, right? So it's and one of our takeaways from that was to have wide and shallow health checks as opposed to sort of narrow and deep health checks. And related to that, I think is, you know, the other thing I wanted to talk about was when you talk about dependencies and you do detect that a dependency is down, and a really important concept is this idea of like, is it critical, right? Like what can you do? Are there things like rate limiting, load shedding, that sort of thing that you can do that says that, like, it's really important to note that, like, for in many cases an outage versus a degradation versus a graceful degradation is not at all the same thing, right? So if you can design your system to degrade gracefully, such as, you know, a good example that we've had with Smartsheet that I think I gave in our panel prep was, you know, we have this mail service for my product within Smartsheet, right? And if the mail and so if the mail service is down, what can happen is if the mail service has these queues that it's processing email, but the queues are also processing other things, right? And so and all of those things were calling into the core database. And so if you have, and we would do this thing where we would send emails at the top of the hour for notifications, right? And so what would happen is right at peak time, Monday morning, you know, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, people are coming in, they're signing on, they're starting to do their work, and we're queuing up all these top of the hour notifications, and then we would see these huge spikes on our system activity. And one of the things we realized was like, hey, you know, you don't need to send that email at 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday. You can reduce the number of queues that are processing mail, or in fact get them down to 0. And so this idea of like, okay, what's really a dependency, what really needs to be working versus what's a less critical component of the system, and really knowing that and having a plan for graceful degradation.
I think Graceful Degradation will be the name of my biography.
You have so many biography names by now.
I have a
but
lot, but that one's going to the top.
That's a good
Yeah,
one.
it's really, I mean, I call it failing gracefully. I mean, that's basically, that's for me, it's also about like how to handle when GitHub is down. Like, how do you present to a user that in a way that is not, sorry, something's broken, because we've all seen those error messages where that's what we get when it's actually, you could have maybe shared a little bit more info, maybe a link to a status page or, something like that.
You're like, your little cartoon isn't making me feel any better.
Yeah, but the little like dinosaur game when Chrome is.
Oh, that was good.
That one I really like a lot, actually. That's
like, if you play this game for 30 seconds, the issue will be fixed.
Yeah, it's really soothing for me.
My kids love that game. It's funny. Like sometimes I'll be doing something and the internet will click out and then Chrome will show the dinosaur game and they get like super excited and I'm like, oh my gosh, this means I can't do work.
Addition to like failure. You did it.
So kind of related, it's been mentioned a little bit a couple of times, is just this idea of documentation. Documentation is this like human, it's a very like socio-technical thing, and it's been talked about in a few talks today. This is my opinion, but I strongly believe that where documentation is today is kind of where some things around testing were, 15 years ago, and how we're thinking about it, how to mature it. I'd be curious, what is everyone's thoughts on documentation specifically internally within teams? What are some of your thoughts?
I don't think we put enough emphasis on internal documentation. I realize that my camera keeps crashing and it's extremely funny in a talk about.
And apparently we can't.
It's really
and we
it's bringing me joy.
It's
and
hot
we can't.
Yeah.
We can't trust your battery apparently too. That's also
I know
what it tells
it's
us.
an aftermarket battery that like it's a constant like AC battery. It's a dummy battery, but we don't put enough emphasis on internal documentation. I think I've been on lots of teams where there was very little of it. And for some things, there was none of it. And that makes onboarding so hard. And it makes like existing on that team long-term super hard. So that's something that I think really needs to be stressed more, up to and including having a glossary, because we use a lot of shorthand and there are a lot of specialty tools that just somebody who's more experienced but came from a different part of the industry, they're not going to know what that stuff is, especially if it's proprietary, and your like junior engineer sure isn't either. It's going to be worse for them, and that makes things so much more difficult and so much more stressful than it has to be. This is a huge pet peeve of mine, and I have a whole full-length conference talk about it. But
you'll see in some of my early talks, Kat, there's a slide that's like my first day on the job, and I had like my notebook out and I was listening to someone talk, and it's just 1,000 question marks, and then at the bottom it was like Kafka Franz ?
Yeah, like, it's stuff like that. Like we name stuff in ways that isn't intuitive, like a lot. And if we're going to do that, fine. But every time you use a weird, unintuitive term or shorthand for something, please define it. Just do that. And also pay your technical writers more. They deserve so much more money. They don't make nearly enough money. Please pay your technical writers. Please.
I also think the different, just small comment related to microservices and documentation, different company strategies for naming their microservices varies so widely. And some of them have the weirdest names that are helpful in zero ways. And so
like, when you're looking at vegetables,
when you're looking at a service catalog and you just see like bird names or fish names or like, I don't know, types of coffee, or like, this means nothing to me.
Yeah, what is this? Like pre-release titles for Magic the Gathering sets? Calm down.
Yeah.
Sorry, that I might have just like nerded myself in public. That's okay.
Yeah, I really liked. I mean, I think alternately, I've been in the position where a manager has said, hey, we're having someone new start finally, thank goodness. Write an onboarding doc. And then I just open a doc and I look at it and I'm like, okay, you should know. And then I'm like, I don't know don't think there's anything to write down. Or like, it'll be like a couple things. And then I'm like, I don't know. And it's like, they're very hard to create also. So I think one, you need a lot more lead in. And two, you should have people who are onboarding, contributing to onboarding and internal docs, because you only get to be new at something once. You only get to be completely like, oblivious to a thing once. And capturing that moment and that knowledge is really valuable.
Yeah.
I've even seen, like, as somebody's onboarding task, they need to make one update to some kind of documentation, because we all know something was wrong somewhere in there. And that doesn't seem like too much of an ask to be like, here. And it gives them something that they can check a box off and said they accomplished something that week.
Boxes.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, we instituted, we've had this practice for a while that as part of onboarding, you update docs. And this year with remote onboarding, it's really amazing how far we got with that, because, people had no choice. Normally you ask somebody and then you just find the answer, and this and for whatever reason, I think, when that I think it happening remote really kind of underscored the importance. And so we actually had really good, I think, success with that. And my other thought around, documenting in conventions is really, I think, we had this example. There was a conversation just yesterday that we were having I was having with kind of other engineering leaders at Smartsheet, and someone was saying, well, they were talking to someone and they said, they found 2 wiki pages and they were both out of date, and the person was like, oh, I'm going to create a 3rd wiki page, and we were all like, oh my gosh, please don't. But I think the goal for documentation should be to keep it minimal, right? Like, do not have these duplicates of things floating around. And for things like coding conventions, there are linters for that, right? Like, so if you have to explain why you're naming your variables a certain way, this is not the kind of thing that you should be using documentation for. That should be, pretty self-explanatory. It should be, most modern languages have multiple tools that support this, right? And so the idea should be like, okay, for things that you don't need documentation, don't have it, right? Like, focus your documentation on things that are high value, that cannot be handled by some automated tool that can easily sort of enforce some rules, and keep that documentation in one place and make it used all the time, right? So people aren't finding sort of these random duplicates of things that are out of sync with each other.
Yeah, I love that. One of the projects I've worked on in the past was actually like an API design linter based. It was linting a spec docs. And I loved it because it was this perfect thing of, yes, humans need to give the input into what is our design guidelines or whatever. But then after that, the checking of it, that does not need to be a human process. That can be automated, especially, you're linting YAML or JSON basically. And so, yeah, definitely. I like that. Any other thoughts on docs? I think we have like 2 minutes left. I don't know if I had like a final question or anything. If anybody, final thoughts about stressing our systems you would like to throw in?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, Katy,
Apparently.
you go first. You have better hair.
All right. Well, yours is pretty great. I just wanted to say that, like, to Artie's point earlier, where you have good days and bad days in a system, in a person. You have good hours and bad hours, and like allocate resources, right? Whether it's in yourself or your systems. Like, if I know that work is going to be wild and demand a lot out of me, I try to plan ahead. As long as I know about it, I say, like, I'm going to be so busy. I'm giving 1 million talks next week. Let me make sure that I take care of this stuff in my life. Let me just just know I'm going to order takeout. I'm going to have a friend walk my dogs. I'm going to set myself up for success because I know what's coming in. And don't make yourself you only have 100%, right? A pet peeve, you cannot give 110%. Get out of here. If I know that work takes 80% of me that day, then I know I only have 20% left to give. And that works for yourself and your system. So just know that there is a hard limit to what you can, to the stress you can endure. and be graceful with yourself.
Conveniently, what I was going to say follows up what Katie said very well. We do have to stress our systems, our actual like computer systems and our people systems. And with a computer system, you can do that until it falls over, right? And you have a nice, happy dashboard because the computer doesn't have feelings that tells you when it's about to fall over and when it has fallen over. But your human systems might not be able to do that. A lot of people are not comfortable with or just not willing to tell you when they are overworked or when they're burning out or when they're about to fall over. So while some people definitely will, you can't rely on that. And as companies, as managers, as team leads, you need to learn yourself to recognize the signs, not just in you, but in your team of somebody who's about to fall over. And at that point, you need to step in. It can't be entirely on your employees to tell you when they are about to fall over. They're not computers. We're not computers. And my camera has a computer in it, and it's hot and sweaty right now, and that's why it's falling
loves
over.
this like meta thing it has going on. It's just trying to be clever.
I know, it's a vibe. It's a vibe. That's all I have though.
Arathi, any in like 30 seconds, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just go really quick. I would say, there are a lot of studies that show that for human systems, like a cycle, and this is known for things like exercise, right? But both physically and mentally, a cycle of stress and recovery is actually good for the system. And we have had this period of unprecedented and almost unknowable stress in multiple different ways. And so I would urge everyone, right, like really think about what is recovery for you. It's very hard to know what that looks like. It's not like, okay, doing interval training and then you take 20 seconds off or whatever, but really think about what is recovery for you and make sure that, like, for me it's knitting, believe it or not, right? Like, so I knit like a few rows every evening or something, or sometimes even in the middle of the day, and that's just me. But really think about what is recovery for you, because if you don't have that, we're all under like unprecedented levels of stress.
Definitely. Well, thank you to the panelists. This has been awesome. We could go on longer, but I know it's been a long day of the conference, and thanks everyone for watching the panel too. Bye.